I'll be the first person to argue that beauty has a destructive or decadent quality to it. And that could even be its purpose here on Earth. I've felt that since my first childish observations of beauty. And I also kind of desire the morbidity. But as time goes on and I look more into beauty, the more the other side of beauty becomes apparent to me. And I think this side deserves just as much attention. Beauty is just as much an inspiration to be a good person as it is to be a bad person. It is just as much a reason to be moral, religious, even, as it is to be profane and hedonistic. Maybe beauty won't stretch all the way to the expectations or morals of the Catholic or somebody who wants to be politically correct. But the person who pursues beauty, I think, certainly will share some of their tendencies. The person who pursues beauty can also be aesthetic, have a code of conduct, a sense of law and order, and of course, dignity. I mean, even some eccentric criminals have found themselves ritualistic and superstitious, have found a way to create art out of their horrors, and even, dare I say, they have principles. That's an extreme example, of course, but after reading more and more about beauty, I truly see that no matter how corrupted and exploitative it may be, there is still this contingency for morality. When I say good taste is a moral obligation, I mean good taste is a form of mastery. And mastery requires the same dignity, respect, hard work, and even social implications that other doctrines and disciplines do. The desire for beauty, to see beautiful things every day, to create more beautiful things, is also a desire to be a better person, to see people try harder, to have respect for themselves and the world they interact with. Having good taste is something you need to work for, just like any discipline. It's something that you must commit yourself to, and therefore you emerge a greater version of yourself in the end. You've conquered something. Beauty inspires us to realize our potential, to raise the standards, to have high expectations, and to resist, to revolt against ugliness. And so this raises the question of what is ugly? Like, what do I mean by ugliness? In this particular conversation, I want to reference George Bernard Shaw and his essay, The Sanity of Art. Shaw was an outlier among critics and literary figures of the 1800s, and his writings had a particular impact on the decade and latter half of the 1800s that I am so obsessed with. The 1890s, or fin de siècle in London, was a period where mysticism and spirituality had pervaded the aesthetic movement. Living for beauty and art was a cure for the soul. It wasn't just about hedonism and acting out, and it wasn't just about provoking people, or even to be a dandy and to live leisurely and abuse your wealth, though all of those things were present too. Shaw, of course, didn't defend the hedonism that was present during the 1890s, but he would defend the artists and the aesthetes of that decade with an unusual and distinct moral undertone. He would justify the pursuits of beauty as something which transcended that decadence and the hedonism. Art for art's sake was art for life's sake, but even more so, it was art for humanity's sake. In The Sanity of Art, Shaw says, and I've said this quote before on this, I've talked about this quote on this channel before, but this is probably a better video explaining it. The claim of art to our respect must stand or fall with the validity of its pretension to cultivate and refine our senses and faculties until seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, and tasting become highly conscious and critical acts with us, protesting vehemently against ugliness, noise, discordant speech, frowsy clothing, and foul air, and taking keen interest and pleasure in beauty, in music, and in the open air, besides making us insist as necessary for comfort and decency on clean, wholesome, handsome fabrics to wear, and utensils of fine material and elegant workmanship to handle. Further, art should refine our sense of character and conduct, of justice and sympathy, greatly heightening our self-knowledge, self-control, precision of action, and considerateness, and making us intolerant of baseness, cruelty, injustice, and intellectual superficiality or vulgarity. The worthy artist or craftsman is he who responds to this cultivation of the physical or moral senses by feeding them with pictures, musical compositions, pleasant houses and gardens, good clothes and fine implements, poems, fictions, essays, and dramas, which call the heightened senses and ennobled faculties into pleasurable activity. The greatest artist is he who goes a step beyond the demand, and by supplying works of a higher beauty and a higher interest than have yet been perceived, succeeds after a brief struggle with its strangeness in adding the fresh extension of sense to the heritage of the race. Now that's a lot to listen to, and that's a lot to crack open. After reading it so many times, I guess I can just consolidate. To Shaw, cultivating and refining our senses also refines our character and our conduct, inspires us to justice, and makes us intolerant of ugliness. To Shaw, ugliness is synonymous with injustice, cruelty, vulgarity, and superficiality of intelligence. And it is the artist's job to elevate the standards of the average person and lift society to a higher state of operation, and ipso facto, heighten our morals, make us better people. Ugliness has a somewhat similar meaning to William Morris, and I've talked about William Morris in my past video, and his speech, The Lesser Arts of Life. William Morris was one of the leaders of the arts and crafts movement, which was a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, and The Lesser Arts of Life is an ode to the craftsman, and advocates for the preservation of integrity in the work that is needed to create the things that we interact with to create art, and also to create the things that the utilitarian objects that we hardly think of. So with the Industrial Revolution, there was this increase of cheap and soulless objects alongside treacherous, inhumane working conditions. And it was clear that the Industrial Revolution was to blame for the loss of respect for our fellow man, for his livelihood, and for the introduction of ugly objects into our world, at least partially. An ugly object, an ugly thing, having been made by a machine, is stripped of all the skill, tradition, culture, and dignity that is associated with a human creating those things. All of the human history involved in creating a beautiful object or work of art. The ugly object, at the end of the day, therefore inspires us to treat it with as little care as was given to its creation. And so we respond to ugliness with crass behavior. We as human beings degrade. We lose our dignity, our morals, and we therefore treat the things that we come into contact with less respect. And this is precisely why I say that ugliness hurts you, that ugliness hurts us. I don't mean it like, oh, looking at somebody ugly is like you're hard to look at, I can't look at you. It's not ugliness superficially like that. I'll explain what I mean. Recently, I was driving in a car with a group of friends, and one of my friends starts to complain about how ugly some of the buildings are that we're passing by on this main road. We are in Florida, and she's describing this contemporary beige stucco style, but this is kind of swallowed up all of the ornament and motifs that make brands and businesses recognizable, which is so funny. And we're left with places like McDonald's looking no different from a fucking office building. It makes no sense. It's this like effacing of all identity in a way. And another girl in the car, as we're literally just bitching about these buildings, and another girl in the car says, I don't think people even notice these buildings though. And people have responded in this way before. And now more than ever, I feel the need to retort because I wholeheartedly do not believe that that is true. Whether it's a plastic beige light switch, a brushed metal door handle, or those ghastly contemporary apartment buildings with wood and aluminum siding that you see everywhere now, seeing these things every day, seeing them ever more frequently, affects you. They affect your behavior. Our buildings, if you don't believe me, if you've ever taken an art class, if you've ever understood the very point of learning about art and its history, you'll understand that your buildings, your objects, just like your art, just like your taste in art, says something about us. The things that we create and surround ourselves with are but mirror images of us. And it is why today people are as lackluster, nondescript, and vacant as the contemporary cubic McMansions that we hate so much. It is why people are lost, indecisive, or even worse, are like losing their desire altogether for things. There is not one artist that you will find, not one architect that does not put a piece of their blood, sweat, and tears, their bones, the very fabric of who they are, their identity, into what they create. It's literally impossible to do that. Even if you are copying somebody as an artist, every artist does something by their own hand. It's an extension of who they are in their soul, their penmanship, how they draw, what mediums they use, and everything. If you're an artist, you'll know that. Everything that you do, there's absolutely nothing that you can create that doesn't secretly, or if you're doing it consciously, say something about who you are on an intimate level. So this idea that we're coming into contact with these things and that they don't mean anything is bullshit. And when I see these buildings, these nondescript, boring, cubic buildings, these modern, incorrectly labeled modern buildings, it makes me sad to see that, because I know that the people that are building them, that desire that design, are just like those buildings. We're kind of just, I see these buildings, I see what society desires, and I see that we're receding into nothingness. And it makes me sad. I don't want to see that. I feel like today, though, it is even possible, or maybe it's necessary. I think it's necessary to suggest beauty, the desire, the striving to have beauty in everyday life can be the cure for the maladies of our current society, our problems that we're facing. Extreme consumerism, mass production, short attention spans, easily accessed pleasure, easily rewarded praise, cheap goods, tepid experiences. I feel like using beauty and art as a guide for life, an almost moral life, is definitely possible, because having good taste, developing good taste, requires discipline. It requires skill and effort. The beauty that we're so afraid of, that we talk so much shit on, the destructiveness of beauty, is beauty without bounds. It's hedonism that we hate so much about beauty. Hedonism comes from beauty that isn't earned, beauty not worked for, beauty like total chaos, out of control, beauty which is given and exploited. The beauty that I advocate for, that I'm coming to understand, more and more, is beauty which requires mastery. It requires experience, hard work, effort, skill, technique, care, and consideration. It's a simple beauty that takes up your time and is worth your time. Beauty can be destructive, and it can be very, very interesting and alluring in that way. But as far as living life and how we are to conduct ourselves in society, I definitely think that beauty can be used as an inspiration to be better in the world that we live in right now, and to live more deliberately, to live sensually. I basically just want, in a way, this kind of beauty is a way to slow things down a little bit. We're progressing so quickly, and we just can't keep track of everything that's going on, and we are handling our lives seemingly just with so little care. Beauty requires care. It requires attention and focus, and for you to put some value into it, put stock into it. Beauty is not a luxury, and beauty doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be hedonistic. Beauty's got a bad rep. And I think it's time that we change that.